The iron shackles bit into Helena Ashford's wrists as she stood on the auction block in the center of Kingston, Nevada, her breath forming clouds in the frozen December air of 1883, while men shouted numbers that would determine whether she lived or died before spring arrived. She had been 22 years old for exactly 3 weeks when the debt collectors came for her father's ranch outside of Carson City. They found him already dead, frozen in his own bed during a night when the temperature dropped so low that water turned to ice inside their cabin. The creditors took everything, including Helena herself, claiming an old territorial law that allowed human collateral for unpaid debts. She knew the law was questionable at best, corrupt at worst, but she had no money for a lawyer and no family left to fight for her. The winter of 1883 would be remembered as one of the harshest in Nevada history. Snow had started falling in early November and never stopped. Livestock froze standing up in fields. Entire families perished in their homes when fuel ran out. The few who survived did so by any means necessary, and morality became a luxury no one could afford. Helena's thin cotton dress provided almost no protection against the wind that howled down from the Sierra Nevada mountains. She had lost feeling in her toes an hour ago. The crowd of men gathered in front of the makeshift platform stomped their feet and rubbed their hands together, their faces ruddy from cold and whiskey. Most looked at her with the detached assessment usually reserved for horses or cattle. A few leered with intentions that made her stomach turn. "What am I bid for this young woman?" the auctioneer called out, his voice cutting through the wind. "Healthy, strong, can cook and clean. 7-year term of service to clear her father's debts. 7 years. Helena closed her eyes. She would be 29 before she tasted freedom again, assuming whoever bought her contract did not work her to death first. $50, called out a heavy-set man with tobacco-stained teeth. Helena recognized him as Silas Crowder, who owned a saloon on the edge of town. Girls who worked for Crowder rarely lasted more than a year before they disappeared or ended up in the town cemetery. $50, do I hear 60? The auctioneer's breath created a fog around his face. 60, said another man, this one wearing the clothes of a mine foreman. Helena did not know him, but she could see the cruel set of his mouth. Her legs trembled, though whether from cold or fear she could no longer tell. She scanned the crowd, looking for any face that might offer hope, finding none. These men saw an opportunity, nothing more. Some wanted cheap labor for their businesses or ranches. Others wanted something she would rather die than give. 75, Crowder shouted, stepping closer to the platform. He looked Helena up and down with eyes that made her skin crawl despite the numbness spreading through her body. $75, going once, $500. The voice came from the back of the crowd, deep and steady and utterly certain. Every head turned. Helena stood on her toes, trying to see who had spoken. The crowd parted slowly and a tall man walked forward. He wore a heavy wool coat and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the directness of his gaze. He moved with the easy confidence of someone comfortable in his own skin, his boots crunching through the packed snow. $500, the auctioneer repeated, his voice rising with excitement. Do I hear 525? Crowder's face had gone red. 525, he spat. The tall man reached the front of the platform and looked up at Helena for the first time. His eyes were the color of creek water in summer, somewhere between blue and green and gray, and they met hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Something passed between them in that moment, something she could not name but felt in her bones. $1,000, the tall man said, never breaking eye contact with her. Cash money, and I want her debts cleared completely. No 7-year contract, no terms of service. I buy her freedom outright." The crowd erupted in murmurs. The auctioneer stammered, clearly trying to work out whether such an arrangement was even possible. Crowder looked like he wanted to start a fight but thought better of it when he saw the gun belt the tall man wore beneath his coat. "That is highly irregular," the auctioneer said. "I do not care about regular. I care about legal. Her father's debts were $820. I am offering $1,000, which more than covers the amount owed plus your commission. In exchange, Miss Ashford walks away from here as a free woman with no obligations to anyone." The tall man pulled a thick envelope from his coat pocket. "I have the money right here. Do we have a deal? Or do I take my business to the territorial judge and ask him to examine the legality of this entire proceeding?" The threat hung in the air. Everyone knew that selling human beings to cover debts existed in a gray area of territorial law, tolerated only because no one with power had bothered to challenge it. A man with $1,000 probably had the means to make trouble. The auctioneer licked his lips, then nodded. "Sold to the gentleman in the back. Come forward and settle your account." Helena's knees nearly gave out. The tall man climbed onto the platform with surprising agility and produced a key for her shackles. As the iron fell away from her wrists, she saw the deep bruises underneath, purple and black against her pale skin. "Can you walk?" he asked quietly. "I think so." Her voice came out as a whisper, her throat tight with cold and emotion. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The warmth of it, still holding his body heat, made her gasp. Her frozen skin awakened with a painful tingling sensation. He kept one hand on her elbow as he guided her down the platform steps, his touch firm but gentle. The crowd watched in silence as they walked away. Helena could feel their eyes on her back, could hear the whispered speculations beginning. The tall man led her to a sturdy gray horse tied to a post outside the general store. He lifted her onto the saddle with ease, then swung up behind her. "Hold on," he said, and urged the horse into a walk. They rode in silence through the snow-covered streets of Kingston. Helena sat stiffly in front of him, acutely aware of his solid presence behind her, the way his arms encircled her as he held the reins. She realized she did not even know his name, this stranger who had just spent a fortune to save her life. As if reading her thoughts, he spoke. "My name is Kade Rivers. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town." "Helena Ashford," she replied, though he obviously already knew. "Why did you do that? Buy your freedom?" "Yes." He was quiet for a moment, guiding the horse around a frozen drift. "Because it was wrong. What they were doing to you was wrong, and I had the means to stop it, so I did. You do not even know me." "I know enough. I knew your father, actually. Joseph Ashford was a good man. He helped me when I first came to Nevada, gave me advice about ranching in this territory. I did not know he had passed until this morning when I heard what was happening in town." His voice carried genuine regret. "I am sorry for your loss." Tears stung Helena's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since they dragged her from her father's cabin 3 days ago. "Thank you," she managed. They rode on through the blizzard. The wind had picked up, turning the snow horizontal, reducing visibility to almost nothing. Helena huddled deeper into Cade's coat, feeling him shift behind her to block more of the wind with his body. She should have been terrified, riding off into a storm with a strange man, but somehow she was not. There had been honesty in his eyes on that platform, and honor in the way he spoke of her father. By the time they reached the ranch, Helena could barely feel her face. Cade dismounted first, then lifted her down, steadying her when her legs refused to support her weight. He handed the horse's reins to a young man who came running from the barn, then half-carried Helena toward the main house. It was a solid structure, built from timber and stone, with smoke rising from 2 chimneys. Kade kicked open the front door and brought her into a room wonderfully warm from a blazing fireplace. He set her carefully on a chair near the fire, then knelt in front of her. "We need to warm you up slowly," he said, pulling off her thin, frozen shoes. He sucked in a breath when he saw her feet, the toes alarmingly white. "Can you feel these at all?" She shook her head. His jaw tightened, but his hands remained gentle as he examined her feet, then her hands. "You have frostbite, but it does not look too severe. We caught it in time." He stood and called toward the back of the house. "Mrs. Chen, I need your help." An older Chinese woman appeared from what Helena assumed was the kitchen. She took one look at Helena and began issuing rapid instructions. Kade nodded and disappeared, returning moments later with blankets, cloths, and a basin of water that was barely warm. For the next hour, Mrs. Chen directed the treatment of Helena's frostbite while Kade helped with quiet efficiency. They warmed her extremities gradually, wrapped her in layers of blankets, and convinced her to drink cup after cup of weak tea. The process was excruciating as feeling returned to her frozen flesh, and Helena could not hold back small cries of pain. "I know it hurts," Kade said, his voice low and soothing. "But pain means the tissue is still alive. That is a good thing." When Mrs. Chen was finally satisfied that Helena was out of immediate danger, she produced a bowl of hot soup. Helena's hands shook too badly to hold the spoon, so Kade sat beside her and fed her with patient care, waiting while she managed each swallow. "You should rest now," he said when the bowl was empty. "Mrs. Chen has prepared a room for you upstairs. It has a stove and we will keep it fed through the night." "Wait." Helena caught his sleeve as he started to stand. "I do not understand. You said you bought my freedom, but what does that mean? What do you want from me?" He settled back into his chair, his expression serious. "It means exactly what I said. You are free. You owe me nothing, Helena. When the storm clears and you are strong enough to travel, I will give you money for a fresh start wherever you want to go. You have my word. But you spent $1,000. I did. No one does that expecting nothing in return." Kade was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with old pain. 5 years ago, I was in Texas working on a ranch. There was a girl there, a Mexican girl whose family owed money to the ranch owner. He forced her to work in his house, and everyone knew what that meant. I was young and scared of losing my job. I kept my head down and told myself it was not my business. He looked at Helena then, his eyes haunted. "She hanged herself in the barn one night. She was 16 years old." Helena's throat tightened. "I swore then that if I ever had the power to stop something like that, I would. So when I heard what was happening to you today, I knew I had to act. I do not expect anything from you except that you live, Helena, that you get the chance that girl never had." She studied his face in the firelight, seeing the truth etched in every line. This man had ghosts that haunted him, and he was trying to make peace with them. She was not a good deed or a possession to him. She was a second chance. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted quietly. "My father's ranch is gone, sold to cover debts. I have no other family, no friends who could take me in during a winter like this. If you turn me out, I will freeze before I make it back to town." "I am not turning you out. You can stay here as long as you need to, through the whole winter if necessary. When spring comes, we will figure out what is next. I should work for my keep. Only if you want to and only when you are well enough. This is not a contract, Helena. You are a guest in my home, nothing more, Mrs. Chen reappeared with a disapproving look. "Too much talking. Girl needs rest now." Kade smiled, and the expression transformed his face from handsome to devastating. "Yes, madam. Come on, let's get you upstairs." He helped Helena up the wooden staircase to a small but comfortable bedroom. The stove in the corner radiated warmth, and the bed was piled high with quilts. Mrs. Chen had laid out a clean nightgown, far too big but blessedly warm. "I will be in the room at the end of the hall if you need anything," Kade said from the doorway. "Do not hesitate to call out." After he left, Helena changed into the nightgown with trembling fingers and collapsed onto the bed. Every muscle in her body ached, and her feet and hands throbbed as circulation returned. But she was warm and safe and free, three things she had not expected to be when morning came. She fell asleep with tears on her cheeks, crying for her father, for the girl in Texas, for herself, and strange as it seemed, for the complicated man downstairs who carried the weight of old failures and tried to balance the scales with unexpected kindness. The storm raged for 3 more days. Helena spent most of that time in bed, recovering from her ordeal and following Mrs. Chen's strict instructions. The elderly woman brought her meals, changed the bandages on her worst frostbite, and clucked disapprovingly whenever Helena tried to do too much too soon. On the 4th day, Helena woke to silence. The wind had finally stopped. She got out of bed carefully, testing her feet. The pain had subsided to a dull ache, and the dangerous white color had been replaced by an angry red. She dressed in clothes Mrs. Chen had left for her, a simple brown dress that was too large but serviceable, and made her way downstairs. She found Kade in the kitchen, cooking breakfast. He looked up when she entered, surprise crossing his face. "You are up." The storm stopped. It did. "How are you feeling?" "Better." "Sore, but better." She hesitated in the doorway. "Where is Mrs. Chen?" "Her cottage is on the other side of the property. She does not stay in the main house. I try to cook for myself when I can." He gestured to the stove. "I am making eggs and bacon. Are you hungry?" "Starving, actually." He smiled and pulled out a chair for her at the small kitchen table. "Sit. This will be ready in a few minutes." Helena watched him work, noticing the easy competence with which he moved around the kitchen. He was younger than she had initially thought, probably no more than 25 or 26. His dark hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar. Without his coat and hat, she could see the lean strength of his build, the broad shoulders and narrow hips of a man who spent his life doing hard physical work. "How long have you had this ranch?" she asked. 3 years. "I bought it from a man who wanted to move back east. It was not much when I got it, just the house and barn and about 100 acres. I have been building it up slowly, buying more land when I can, increasing the herd." He slid a plate in front of her, piled high with food. "I run cattle mostly, some horses. That must be expensive." "It is. I spend most of what I make buying livestock or improving the property." He sat across from her with his own plate. Helena took a bite of eggs and nearly moaned. She had not realized how hungry she was until food was in front of her. "If you spend everything on the ranch, how did you have $1,000? Kade was quiet for a moment. "I was saving it to buy the Pritchard section, the land that borders my eastern property line. Old man Pritchard died last year, and his widow has been looking for a buyer. It would have given me access to a year-round creek and another 300 acres of grazing land." Was, he met her eyes. "I spent it on something more important." Helena set down her fork, a lump forming in her throat. "You gave up your dreams for the ranch to save me." "I delayed them. There is a difference. I will save up again. The land will still be there, or some other land will be. You only get one life, Helena. I was not going to let those men take yours." She did not know what to say to that, to the matter-of-fact way he had sacrificed something so important. She focused on her breakfast, blinking back tears. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Finally, Helena said, "I meant what I said before. I want to work for my keep." I can cook and clean, tend a garden, care for chickens if you have them. I am strong and I am not afraid of hard work. I have chickens, and I was never much good with a garden. I usually end up eating whatever Mrs. Chen grows on her plot. Kade considered her thoughtfully. If you truly want to help, I would not refuse, but I do not want you to feel obligated. I need to, actually. I need to feel useful, he nodded, understanding in his eyes. Then we will work something out, but not today. Today you should rest and keep recovering. What will you be doing? Checking on the cattle, making sure none of them got trapped in drifts during the storm, checking fences, seeing what damage the blizzard caused. He pushed back from the table. It will be a long day in the cold, not exciting. Can I come with you? Kade raised an eyebrow. You want to ride around in the snow looking at cows? I want to see the ranch, and I have been cooped up in that bedroom for days. Please. He studied her for a long moment, then shrugged. If Mrs. Chen clears you and you dress warmly, I do not see why not, Mrs. Chen did clear her, though with abundant warnings about not overdoing it. The elderly woman bundled Helena into layers of wool and flannel until she could barely move, then added a heavy coat and gloves that were far too big. Kade was waiting by the barn with 2 horses saddled and ready. He helped her mount, his hand steady on her waist, then swung onto his own horse with easy grace. They rode out into a world transformed by the storm. Snow blanketed everything in white that glittered painfully bright under the morning sun. The sky was a blue so pure and deep it almost hurt to look at. Kade led her across his property, pointing out boundaries and features buried under the snow. She saw the sturdy fences he had built, the windbreak of cottonwoods he was cultivating, the small herd of cattle clustered in a sheltered valley. He talked about his plans for the ranch with an enthusiasm that made his whole face light up. I want to build a better barn next year, he said as they paused on a small rise overlooking his land. The current one is adequate but too small if I want to grow the herd, and I need a proper bunkhouse for hired men during roundup season. It sounds like you have thought about this a lot. It is all I think about sometimes. He glanced at her, a slight color rising in his cheeks. I must sound foolish going on about barns and cattle. No, you sound like a man who knows what he wants and is willing to work for it. That is not foolish at all. They rode further, and Helena found herself relaxing in the saddle, enjoying the bite of cold air on her face and the vast emptiness of the snow-covered range. Kade pointed out various landmarks, telling stories about near disasters and small victories that made her laugh. When they finally returned to the house as the sun was setting, Helena's entire body ached, but it was the good kind of ache that came from exercise rather than injury. She felt more alive than she had in weeks. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Helena took over most of the cooking, discovering that she enjoyed creating meals in Kade's warm kitchen. She tended the chickens, collected eggs, and began planning a spring garden with Mrs. Chen's advice. Kade worked from before dawn until after dark, maintaining the ranch through the bitter cold, but he always made time to eat meals with Helena, to ask about her day, to share stories by the fire in the evening. She learned more about him in those fireside conversations. He had been born in Missouri, the youngest of 4 brothers. His family had lost everything in the war, and he had headed west at 17 to make his own way. He had worked cattle drives, hired on at various ranches, and saved every penny until he could buy his own land. I never want to be at someone else's mercy again, he told her one night. I never want someone to have the power to take everything from me. That is what this ranch means. It is mine. No matter what happens, I built something that belongs to me. Helena understood that drive better than he knew. She told him about growing up on her father's small ranch, about learning to ride before she could properly walk, about the hard years after her mother died when it was just her and her father against the world. "He did the best he could," she said softly. "But the ranch was never profitable. He borrowed money to buy cattle that died in a drought, borrowed more to replace them. Before long, the debt was bigger than the land was worth. It was not your fault, I know, but I should have seen how bad things were. I should have convinced him to sell before it was too late." "You cannot blame yourself for your father's choices, Helena. You were a child and then you were a young woman trying to survive. That is all anyone can do." The weeks passed, and January gave way to February. The worst of the winter was over, but the cold remained fierce. Helena found herself watching for Kade's return each evening, listening for his footsteps on the porch, feeling a warmth spread through her chest when he walked through the door. She told herself it was simple gratitude, nothing more, but she knew she was lying. She was falling in love with him. It was there in the way her heart raced when he smiled at her, in the way she memorized every detail of his face, the small scar above his left eyebrow, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, in the way she lay awake at night in her room, thinking about him in his room at the end of the hall, wishing for something she had no right to want. He had saved her, given her shelter and kindness and respect, asking for nothing in return. The last thing he needed was for her to develop feelings for him. So she kept her emotions locked away, afraid that revealing them would ruin the fragile peace they had built. But sometimes she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something warm and wondering and almost painful. In those moments, she let herself hope. One evening in late February, they were sitting by the fire after supper. Kade had been quieter than usual all day, distracted. Finally, he set down the piece of leather he had been working into a new bridle and turned to her. "Helena, I need to tell you something." Her stomach dropped at his serious tone. "What is it?" "I am going into town tomorrow. There is a ranchers' meeting and I need to be there, but that is not the only reason I am going." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I am meeting with a lawyer to draw up legal papers documenting that your father's debts have been satisfied, and you are a free woman with no outstanding obligations. I want you to have something official, something that proves no one can ever come after you for that debt again." "Oh." Relief flooded through her. "That is very thoughtful. There is more. I have been thinking about your situation, about what happens when spring comes. You said you have nowhere to go, no way to support yourself. Here it came." He was going to tell her it was time to leave, that she had recovered enough, that he had done his duty. Helena braced herself, trying to prepare for the pain. "I have a proposal," Kade continued. "And I want you to think about it carefully before you answer, because I do not want you to feel pressured." "What kind of proposal?" He took a deep breath. "Marry me." Helena stared at him, certain she had misheard. "What? Marry me?" "Not because you owe me anything, but because it makes practical sense. You need security and a home. I need help running this ranch. Mrs. Chen is getting older and there is more work than one person can handle. If we were married, you would have legal protection. You would own half of everything, so even if something happened to me, you would be provided for. And we get along well, do we not? We are friends." Friends. The word landed like a stone in her chest. He was proposing a marriage of convenience, a business arrangement, nothing more. "I am sorry," Kade said quickly, misreading her silence. "That was too forward. Forget I said anything." "No, I just—" Helena struggled to find words past the tightness in her throat. "You are talking about a marriage in name only. I am talking about whatever you would be comfortable with. I know you have been through a terrible ordeal, and the last thing you need is pressure from me. But I also know that an unmarried woman alone in this world faces challenges. I cannot protect you from unless we make it legal." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I am making a mess of this. What I am trying to say is that I care about you, Helena. I care about what happens to you. This would give you security, independence, your own money, your own property rights. You could leave if you wanted to, and you would have the means to do it. But you would also have a home if you wanted to stay." She looked at him, at the earnest worry in his eyes, and felt something crack inside her chest. He was offering her everything except the one thing she wanted. His heart. But what had she expected? That he would fall in love with her in a few short weeks. That fairy tales happened to girls like her. He was being kind, offering her a practical solution to an impossible situation. She should be grateful. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Of course. Take all the time you need." "And Helena, if the answer is no, nothing changes. You still have a home here for as long as you want it." That night, Helena lay in bed staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning. A marriage to Kade would give her everything she needed to survive. Security, stability, a home, work that mattered. She would wake up every day in this house, share meals with him, work alongside him. She could build a life here, but she would also wake up every day loving a man who saw her as a friend and responsibility. She would watch him, want him, long for something more while knowing she could never ask for it. Eventually, that longing would curdle into resentment or break her heart completely. The alternative was to refuse, and then what? Where would she go? She had no money, no prospects, and winter still held the land in its grip. By the time she was strong enough to travel and find work, she would be completely dependent on Kade's charity. At least as his wife, she would be contributing something. She would have a purpose. In the gray light of dawn, Helena made her decision. She dressed carefully and went downstairs to find Kade already in the kitchen, packing supplies for his trip to town. "I want to say yes," she said without preamble. He turned, surprise written across his face. "You do, but I have conditions." "All right. I want this to be a real marriage, not in terms of, well, that can wait until we are both ready. But I want to be your true partner, not just a housekeeper you married out of pity. I want to work the ranch alongside you, to have a say in decisions, to build something together. Can you agree to that?" Kade crossed the space between them in 3 long strides. He took her hands in his grip warm and strong. "Helena, I never thought of this as a marriage of convenience, not really. I have come to care for you deeply these past weeks. I admire your strength, your resilience, your kindness despite everything you have endured. I would be honored to have you as my true partner in every sense of the word." Her breath caught. "You care for me, more than I probably should admit." "I did not want to say anything because I was afraid you would think I expected something in return for helping you. But the truth is, I wake up looking forward to seeing you at breakfast. I hurry through my work so I can come inside and hear about your day. I fall asleep thinking about your smile." He lifted one of her hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "So yes, I care for you, very much." Tears spilled down Helena's cheeks, but for once they were happy tears. "I care for you too. I did not want to say anything because I thought you saw me as an obligation." "Never an obligation. A gift, maybe. An unexpected blessing that I do not quite believe I deserve." She laughed through her tears and stepped into his arms. He held her carefully as if she might break, his chin resting on top of her head. They stood like that for a long moment, 2 people who had found each other in the harshest winter, learning to trust in the warmth they created together. "So we are really doing this?" Helena asked against his chest. "If you are certain it is what you want." "I am certain." "Then I will talk to the preacher in town today. We can be married as soon as you are ready." They were married 4 days later in the small church in Kingston. Mrs. Chen and 2 of Kade's ranch hands served as witnesses. Helena wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had altered to fit her, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers that the preacher's wife had saved from summer. Kade stood beside her at the altar in his best suit, his hand trembling slightly as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger. When the preacher told him to kiss his bride, he cupped her face gently and touched his lips to hers with a tenderness that made her heart overflow. They rode back to the ranch as husband and wife, and Helena felt as though she had stepped into a dream. She kept looking at the ring on her finger, solid proof that this was real. That night, Kade moved his things into her room, the one she had been using since that first terrible day. He set his belongings down carefully, then turned to her with a question in his eyes. "We do not have to," Helena said, though her pulse raced at the thought. "I want to if you do, but only if you are ready." She was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. She knew the basics of what happened between a husband and wife, but knowing and experiencing were very different things. Still, this was Kade, the man who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, the man she loved. "I am ready," she whispered. He came to her slowly, giving her time to change her mind. His kiss was gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. His hands shook as he helped her out of her dress, and she realized he was nervous too. Somehow that made it easier. They learned each other slowly that night, with patience and care and occasional awkward laughter when they fumbled. When it was over, Helena lay in his arms, her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. "Are you all right?" he asked, stroking her hair. "I am perfect, happy, safe." "Good. That is all I want, for you to feel safe with me." "I do. I feel like the luckiest woman in Nevada." He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "I am pretty sure I am the lucky one." They fell asleep tangled together, and when Helena woke in the morning to find Kade still beside her, sunlight streaming through the window, she felt something settle deep in her soul. This was home. This was where she belonged. The last of winter melted away through March and into April. The snow retreated from the valleys, revealing brown grass that quickly turned green. Wildflowers appeared seemingly overnight, painting the range in colors Helena had almost forgotten existed. She and Kade worked side by side, repairing winter damage, preparing for spring calving, planning the summer's work. Helena discovered that she loved ranch work. She loved being outside, loved working with the animals, loved seeing the tangible results of her labor. Kade taught her to rope and brand, to recognize signs of illness in cattle, to read the weather in the clouds. She taught him to cook more than eggs and bacon, to keep better records of ranch expenses, to make the house feel like a home rather than just a place to sleep. They grew closer every day, learning each other's habits and moods, building the deep intimacy that came from shared work and shared dreams. Helena found herself falling more in love with him as she discovered new facets of his character, his patience with injured animals, his generosity toward neighbors in need, the way he sang off-key while working in the barn, the serious concentration on his face when he was trying to solve a problem. In late April, they were working together to repair a section of fence when Kade straightened suddenly, looking toward the eastern horizon. "Riders coming," he said. Helena shaded her eyes and saw 3 men on horseback approaching at a steady pace. Kade's jaw tightened in a way she had learned meant trouble. "Who are they?" "The one in front is Samuel Pritchard, the old widow's son. He moved back from California when his mother died. The others I do not know." They waited as the riders approached. Samuel Pritchard was a heavy-set man in his 40s with a hard face and suspicious eyes. He reined up a few yards away, looking between Kade and Helena. "Rivers," he said by way of greeting. "Pritchard, what can I do for you? I hear you were interested in buying my mother's land." "I was." That offer has expired. Well, I am here to make you a new offer. I will sell you the Pritchard section for $2,000. Kade laughed without humor. That land is not worth half that, and you know it. I offered your mother a fair price of $900. That is still what it is worth. Not to me. I know you want that creek access, Rivers. I know your herd is growing and you need more grazing land. So the price is $2,000, take it or leave it. Leave it, then. Pritchard's eyes narrowed. You are making a mistake. That land controls the water for this whole section. If I sell it to someone else, they could divert that creek, dry up your water supply. That would be illegal. Lots of things are illegal. Does not mean they do not happen, especially when the sheriff is a reasonable man who understands that water rights are complicated. The threat was clear in his voice. Helena felt anger rising in her chest. You are trying to extort my husband. Pritchard turned his attention to her for the first time, his gaze insulting as it traveled over her. You are the Ashford girl, are not you? The one who was being sold in town last winter. I heard Rivers bought himself a wife. He smiled unpleasantly. Enterprising of you, landing on your feet like that. Kade stepped in front of Helena, his hand moving toward his gun belt. You will apologize to my wife, or you will leave my property right now. The two men with Pritchard shifted in their saddles, hands near their own weapons. For a tense moment, Helena thought violence was inevitable. Then Pritchard laughed and raised his hands in mock surrender. No offense meant. I am just making conversation. He gathered his reins. Think about my offer, Rivers. $2,000 and all your problems go away. But if you do not take it, well, I cannot promise what might happen to that creek. They rode away, and Kade stood watching them until they disappeared from sight. His body was rigid with tension. That is what it looks like when someone tries to steal everything you have built, he said quietly. And they do it legal, with a smile. Helena took his hand. We will figure something out. How? I do not have $2,000. Even if I sold every head of cattle I own, I could not raise that much, and he knows it. He is going to sell that land to someone who will make my life hell until I am forced to sell and move on. Then we fight. We talk to a lawyer about water rights. We make sure everyone knows what he is trying to do. Kade looked at her, his expression softening slightly. When did you get so fierce? When someone threatened my home and my husband. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. I love you, Helena Rivers. Have I told you that yet? Her heart stopped. No, you have not. Well, I do. I love you more than I thought possible. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. I love you too, she whispered against his shirt. We are going to protect what we have built, Kade. Together. Over the next few weeks, they did everything they could to shore up their position. Kade spoke to a lawyer in Carson City who confirmed that diverting the creek would be illegal but difficult to prevent without costly litigation. They talked to other ranchers in the area, warning them about Pritchard's tactics. Everyone sympathized, but no one was willing or able to help financially. Then one evening in May, Kade came home with news. Pritchard sold the land. Helena's stomach sank. To who? A group of investors from San Francisco. They are planning to run sheep on it. Sheep. The worst possible news. Sheep cropped grass so short that cattle could not graze behind them. Sheep required intensive water use. And worst of all, sheep ranchers and cattle ranchers had been feuding violently across the West for decades. What are we going to do? Helena asked. I do not know yet, but I promise you we are not giving up. This ranch is ours and I will fight for it. The sheep arrived in June, 3,000 head with a dozen armed men to guard them. Almost immediately, problems started. The sheep fouled the creek that ran through both properties. Several of Kade's cattle sickened from contaminated water. When he rode over to complain, the sheep camp foreman told him to take it up with the owners in San Francisco. Tensions rose throughout the summer. Fences were cut in the night. Shots were fired, though no one was hit. Kade rode out each morning not knowing if he would come back, and Helena spent each day sick with worry. In August, things came to a head. One of Kade's bulls wandered onto the sheep range and was shot dead. When Kade confronted the foreman, the man claimed the bull was threatening the flock. It was an obvious lie, but without witnesses, there was nothing to be done. That night, Kade sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. "They are trying to force us out. If I retaliate, they will use it as an excuse to escalate. If I do nothing, they will keep pushing until we have no choice but to leave." Helena sat beside him, her mind racing. There had to be a solution, something they were not seeing. Then an idea struck her. "What if we buy them out?" Kade looked up. "What?" "Those investors from San Francisco, they did not buy that land because they love sheep ranching. They bought it to make money, right? What if we offer them a profit on their investment?" "Helena, we do not have that kind of money." "But maybe we could get it. What if we took on partners? Sold shares in the ranch to other cattlemen who would benefit from controlling that land and getting the sheep out of here?" Kade stared at her, hope dawning in his eyes. "That could work. If I could convince 3 or 4 of the larger ranchers to invest, we could pool enough money to make a serious offer. And they would be protecting their own interests too, because if the sheep ranchers get a foothold here, it affects everyone." He pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "You are brilliant. How did I get so lucky? You spent $1,000 you could not afford on a stranger. Best investment I ever made." Kade spent the next 2 weeks meeting with every rancher within 50 miles. He laid out his plan, showed them the numbers, and explained how sheep operations in the region would affect all of them. One by one, they agreed to invest. By the end of August, Kade had commitments for enough capital to offer the San Francisco investors $3,000 for land they had paid $2,000 for. The investors accepted within a week. They had already lost money on the venture after paying for the sheep and the armed guards, and they were happy to cut their losses and get out. In early September, Kade signed the papers that gave him ownership of the Pritchard section. He and his partners immediately evicted the sheep operation, giving them 2 weeks to clear out. The night after the papers were signed, Kade and Helena rode out to the creek that had caused so much trouble. They dismounted and stood on the bank, watching the water run clear now that the sheep were gone. "This is all ours," Kade said wonderingly. "Over 400 acres and the best water source in the county. Ours and your partners. They own shares in the profit, but I retain controlling interest. The land is in our names, Helena. Yours and mine." She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body, the steady beat of his heart. They had been married for 6 months, and in that time they had built something worth fighting for. Not just the ranch, but a life together, a partnership based on love and respect and shared dreams. "I have news," she said quietly. "What kind of news?" "I am pregnant. The baby should come in late winter or early spring." Kade went very still. Then he spun her around to face him, his eyes searching hers. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. I have suspected for a few weeks, but I did not want to say anything until I was certain. Mrs. Chen confirmed it yesterday." "A baby." His voice was full of wonder. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Helena. I am terrified and thrilled and happier than I have ever been in my life." He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child, a real family." They stood together by the creek as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Helena thought about how far she had come from that terrible day on the auction block. She had been sold during the harshest winter, certain she was going to die. Instead, a cowboy had bought her freedom and through patience and kindness and love had won her heart. Now she stood on land that belonged to them both, carrying their child, filled with hope for the future. It was more than she had ever dared to dream. The baby arrived in late February of 1884, a boy they named James. He had his father's eyes and a set of lungs that could wake the entire ranch. Kade took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, walking the floor at night when James was colicky, changing diapers without complaint, gazing at his son with such open adoration that Helena fell in love with him all over again. Mrs. Chen proclaimed James the finest baby in Nevada and spent hours rocking him and singing Chinese lullabies. The ranch hands took turns whittling toys for him. Even the gruffest cowboy would melt when baby James grabbed onto his finger with a surprisingly strong grip. Spring came early that year, the snow melting quickly to reveal a land ready to burst into bloom. Helena recovered from childbirth faster than Mrs. Chen expected, eager to get back to work. She and Kade fell into a new rhythm, trading off baby duty with ranch work, learning to be parents while still being partners. In April, unexpected visitors arrived. A telegram came first, announcing that Kade's brother David was coming from Missouri with his wife and 2 children. Kade was both excited and nervous as he cleaned the house and made preparations. "I have not seen David in almost 6 years," he told Helena. "We were not on good terms when I left Missouri. I felt like my family had given up, and he thought I was abandoning them." "But you have been sending money home, have not you?" "Every few months, whatever I can spare, but I do not know if that made things better or worse." When Kade Rivers arrived with his family, the resemblance between the brothers was striking. David was older by 3 years and heavier set, with the look of a man who worked hard but could not quite get ahead. His wife Martha was quiet and watchful, and their children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, clung to her skirts. The first few hours were awkward, with the brothers circling around years of unspoken hurt. Then David saw the ranch, saw what Kade had built, and something shifted. "You did it," David said, standing in the middle of Kade's land, looking at the cattle grazing peacefully. "You actually did it. You said you were going to make something of yourself out west, and I did not believe you. I thought you were running away, but you were running towards something." "I had to prove I could do it," Kade said. "For myself. I understand that now, and I am sorry for the things I said when you left. I am sorry for leaving when the family needed me." They embraced then, and the years of distance melted away. Over dinner that night, David explained that he and Martha were thinking about moving west themselves. The farm in Missouri was barely producing enough to feed them, and he wanted better opportunities for his children. "There is land available near here," Kade said. "Not as much as I have, but enough to start, and I could use a reliable neighbor I trust. We could help each other." Helena watched her husband's face as he talked to his brother, saw the joy there at having family close again. She thought about how alone she had been before Kade, how isolated and afraid. Now she had a husband she loved, a son, a home, and soon extended family nearby. The emptiness was being filled with people and love and connection. David and his family stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time they left, plans had been made. They would return to Missouri, sell what little they had, and move to Nevada permanently. Kade would help them find land and get started. It would take time and work, but the Rivers brothers would build their futures side by side. Summer brought the hard work of haying and preparing for winter. Helena worked alongside the ranch hands, baby James strapped to her back in a carrier Mrs. Chen had made. She cut and raked hay, repaired fences, tended the vegetable garden that now supplied food for the ranch. Her body grew strong and tan, her hands calloused, her skills sharp. Kade often stopped whatever he was doing just to watch her work, a smile playing at his lips. "What?" she would ask, self-conscious under his gaze. "Just appreciating my wife. You are amazing, do you know that? I am sweaty and dirty and probably smell like cattle." "Amazing," he repeated, pulling her close despite her protests and kissing her thoroughly. They made love in the barn one afternoon when baby James was napping in the house under Mrs. Chen's watchful eye. It was quick and urgent and joyful, both of them grinning like teenagers afterward as they picked hay from each other's hair. "Think Mrs. Chen knows what we were doing?" Helena asked. "Mrs. Chen knows everything. She probably timed it to give us privacy." Helena laughed and leaned against him, perfectly content. In September, Kade's brother returned with his family and their belongings loaded into 2 wagons. True to his word, Kade helped them acquire a homestead claim on land about 10 miles from his own ranch. He spent weeks helping David build a cabin, barn, and corrals. Helena and Martha became friends, and the children loved playing with baby James, even though he was too young to do much besides gurgle at them. By the end of October, the Rivers brothers had established a partnership that went beyond family ties. They shared resources, traded labor, and supported each other through the endless challenges of ranching. David's children brought laughter and energy that had been missing from the isolated ranch. Sunday dinners became a tradition, alternating between the 2 households. Helena loved these gatherings. She loved cooking for a crowd, loved the noise and chaos of children running through the house, loved watching Kade with his niece and nephew. He was patient with them, teaching them to ride and rope, answering their endless questions with good humor. "You are a wonderful father," Martha told Helena one evening while they were cleaning up after dinner. "James is lucky to have you both. I am the lucky one. A year ago, I did not think I would survive the winter. Now I have everything I ever wanted." Kade said you 2 met under difficult circumstances. That is one way to put it. Helena told Martha the story, watching her face shift from shock to anger to sympathy. "My God, you could have been killed or worse." "I know. Kade saved my life, though he does not like when I phrase it that way. He says I saved myself just by surviving." "You both might be right." Martha squeezed her hand. "I am glad he found you. He is different than I remember, happier, more settled. He gave me a home. I try to give him peace." As winter approached again, Helena found herself thinking about the previous year, about how much had changed. She was no longer the terrified girl on the auction block. She was Helena Rivers, wife and mother and rancher. She had calluses and confidence and a purpose. The winter of 1884 was mild compared to the previous year's nightmare. Snow fell, but not with the same deadly intensity. The cattle weathered it well, and the ranch prospered. In January, Helena discovered she was pregnant again. "Already," Kade said when she told him, though he was grinning. "Apparently. You certainly seem determined to populate this ranch." "I like practicing," he said, waggling his eyebrows in a way that made her laugh. "Well, you better start planning how to expand the house, because we are going to need more room." This pregnancy was easier than the first. Helena knew what to expect, and her body was stronger. She worked almost until her due date, much to Mrs. Chen's vocal disapproval. In late September of 1885, she delivered a healthy baby girl they named Clara. Clara was different from James, calmer and more observant. She rarely cried, preferring to watch the world around her with solemn eyes. Kade was completely smitten, declaring that his daughter was the most beautiful child ever born. "You said the same thing about James," Helena reminded him. "I was right both times." The years that followed brought steady growth and prosperity. The ranch expanded, The cattle herd grew, and the Rivers family became well respected in the region. Helena and Kade added 2 more children to their family, another son named Thomas born in 1887, and a second daughter named Grace who arrived in 1889. Their house grew along with their family. Kade built additional rooms, a larger kitchen, and eventually a second story. It was chaotic and noisy and full of life. Helena loved every minute of it, even the hard moments when children were sick or crops failed or money was tight. She and Kade grew closer with each passing year, their love deepening from passionate romance into something richer and more enduring. They were partners in every sense, making decisions together, supporting each other through challenges, celebrating victories as a team. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep, they would sit together on the porch and talk about the early days. "You ever regret it?" Helena asked one night in the summer of 1890. "Spending that money on me instead of the land." Kade pulled her close, his arm around her shoulders. "Not for a single second. That money bought me everything that matters. You, our children, this life we built together. The land came anyway, and even if it had not, I would still have made the same choice. I used to have nightmares about that day, about what would have happened if you had not been there. But I was there, and you are safe, you are loved, you are home." She turned to kiss him, pouring years of gratitude and devotion into it. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "Take me to bed, Cowboy," she whispered. He grinned and stood, sweeping her up into his arms despite her protests that she was too heavy. "Yes, madam." Their passion had not dimmed with time or children or the daily grind of ranch work. If anything, it had grown stronger, grounded in deep knowledge of each other, in trust and commitment and abiding love. In 1892, James turned 8 and began taking on more responsibilities around the ranch. He followed his father everywhere, learning to ride and rope and read the land. Clara, at 6, was quieter but equally determined, surprising everyone with her skill at gentling horses. Thomas, at 5, was all energy and mischief, constantly getting into trouble. And little Grace, at 3, was the baby everyone doted on, sweet-natured and affectionate. Kade's brother David had prospered as well. His ranch was smaller than Kade's but successful. His children were growing into capable young people. The extended family remained close, gathering for holidays and helping each other through the endless work of ranching. One evening in the spring of 1893, Helena and Kade were sitting on their porch watching the sunset. The children were playing in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze. 10 years had passed since that terrible winter day when Helena had stood on an auction block, certain her life was over. "What are you thinking about?" Kade asked, noticing her distant expression. "How much can change in a decade? How different my life is from what I expected. Better or worse?" She looked at him, at the face she had come to love more than her own, at the laugh lines around his eyes and the silver just starting to show in his hair. "So much better. I did not know it was possible to be this happy." "Neither did I. You gave me something I did not know I was missing." "What is that?" "Purpose beyond just surviving. Before you, I was working to build something, but I did not really understand why. Now I know. I was building this, a home for us, for our family. Everything I do is for you and the children. And I would do anything for you. You bought my freedom, Kade, but what you really gave me was a life worth living. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I was unlovable, and a future I never dared to dream of." He took her hand, the gesture as natural as breathing after so many years together. "We saved each other, I think. I was just going through the motions before you. You gave me a reason to build something real." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. Helena thought about the girl she had been, frightened and alone in the harshest winter. That girl would never have believed this future was possible. But here she was, surrounded by love and family, on land that belonged to her, living a life she had built with her own 2 hands alongside a man who treasured her. The years continued to pass, bringing the joys and challenges that filled any life. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and broken fences, injuries and illnesses, and the 1,000 small crises of raising children on a remote ranch. But through it all, Helena and Kade faced everything together. In 1895, James at 11 was already skilled enough to work alongside the ranch hands during Roundup. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's determination. Clara at 9 had discovered a talent for healing animals and spent hours helping Mrs. Chen with her various remedies and treatments. Thomas at 7 was still wild and reckless, giving his parents regular heart attacks with his adventures. And Grace at 5 was developing a love of reading, often found curled up with one of the few books the family owned. David's children were growing as well, and the 2 families remained intertwined. Helena had more nieces and nephews than she could keep track of, and she loved every chaotic minute of family gatherings. Mrs. Chen, though well into her 70s now, remained a vital part of the ranch. She had taught Helena everything she knew about gardening, preserving food, and Chinese medicine. She was grandmother to all the children and the ranch's unofficial matriarch. In the winter of 1896, Mrs. Chen fell ill with pneumonia. Despite everyone's best efforts and Helena's desperate nursing, the elderly woman passed away peacefully in her sleep. The entire ranch mourned her loss. They buried her on a hill overlooking the property she had loved, and Helena made sure fresh flowers were always on the grave. She was family, Helena told her children as they stood at the graveside. She helped your father long before I came here, and she taught me so much. We would not have this life without her wisdom and hard work. Loss was part of life on the ranch, but so was renewal. That same spring, baby cattle were born, foals arrived, and the cycle continued. Helena found herself pregnant again at 35, a surprise after 7 years. In late autumn, she delivered twin boys, Samuel and Daniel. 6 children, Kade said, holding both babies with an expression of wonder mixed with terror. We have 6 children, Helena. I noticed. You are going to need to expand the house again. I am going to need to expand the barn to hold all the cattle I will have to sell to feed everyone. But he was smiling as he said it, his eyes soft as he looked at his unexpected sons. The twins thrived, adding even more chaos to an already loud household. James, now 13, was philosophical about his new brothers. Clara helped with the babies whenever she could. Thomas thought twins were the most exciting thing that had ever happened. And Grace loved having new dolls to play with, though she was constantly being reminded that her baby brothers were not toys. As the 1890s drew to a close, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful in the region. Kade and Helena owned over 600 acres outright and leased additional grazing land. Their cattle herd numbered in the hundreds. They had built a proper bunkhouse and hired hands year-round. The main house had grown from a simple cabin to a substantial home with 8 bedrooms and modern conveniences like a pump in the kitchen. But for all their success, Helena's favorite moments were still the quiet ones. Sunday mornings when she and Kade could sleep a little later while the older children watched the younger ones. Evenings on the porch after the children were in bed. The look on Kade's face when he came in from a long day and found her in the kitchen cooking dinner. The way he still kissed her goodbye every morning and hello every evening, as if they were newlyweds instead of a couple married for over 15 years. On a warm evening in June of 1899, Kade surprised Helena by asking her to go for a ride with him. She left the twins with Clara, now a capable 14-year-old, and rode out with her husband into the golden light of approaching sunset. He led her to the creek where they had stood the night he bought the Pritchard section, the night she had told him about their first baby. They dismounted and walked to the water's edge. "Why did you bring me here?" Helena asked. "Because this is where I realized that our life was really ours. We had fought for it and won. We had a home, a future, a child on the way. Everything I had dreamed of was coming true." He turned to her, taking both her hands. 16 years ago this winter, I saw you standing on that platform, and something in me knew I could not walk away. I told myself I was doing the right thing, saving someone who needed help. But the truth is, I fell in love with you the moment our eyes met. Every decision I made after that was driven by that love. Kade. Tears filled her eyes. I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. Not one. You are my partner, my love, the mother of my children, and the reason I wake up grateful every morning. I just wanted to bring you here and tell you that, on this beautiful evening, in this place that means so much to us." Helena could not speak past the lump in her throat. She threw her arms around him and held on tight, feeling his solid strength, his steady heartbeat, the absolute certainty of his love. When she could finally talk, she said, "You bought my freedom, but you gave me so much more. You gave me a life full of love and purpose and joy. You gave me children and a home and a partnership that makes every day worthwhile. I love you, Kade Rivers. I will love you until the day I die and beyond." They kissed there by the creek as the sun set. Two people who had found each other in the harshest winter and built something beautiful that would endure. The ranch, the land, the cattle, all of it mattered. But what truly mattered was this connection between them, forged in adversity and strengthened by years of shared dreams and hard work. As they rode back to the house in the gathering darkness, Helena thought about the scared young woman she had been and the strong woman she had become. She thought about the cowboy who had seen past the auction block to the person underneath, who had bet everything on a stranger and won more than he could have imagined. Their children would grow up on this land, would carry forward the legacy they had built. James would likely take over the ranch someday. Clara might become a veterinarian, as she had recently started talking about. Thomas would probably give them gray hair before he settled down. Grace had the makings of a teacher. And the twins, still too young to show their paths, would find their own way. But all of them would grow up knowing they were loved, knowing they belonged to a family that had been forged through sacrifice and commitment and enduring devotion. They would know their parents' story, how their mother had been sold during the harshest winter, and their father had bought her freedom and her heart. In the years that followed, as Helena and Kade grew older and their children became adults with families of their own, they never forgot those early days. They never took for granted the miracle of finding each other, of building a life together against all odds. When Helena was 53 and Kade 56, they celebrated their 30th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, and friends who had become family. The house they had built together was full of laughter and music and love. Late that night, after everyone had gone home or gone to bed, Helena and Kade sat on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. His hair was gray now, and her face showed the lines of a life well lived. His hands, calloused from decades of ranch work, held hers with the same tenderness he had shown that first day. 30 years, he said softly. Best 30 years of my life. Mine too. Though I have to admit, when you proposed that marriage of convenience, I did not imagine it would be quite this inconvenient. She gestured at the house, which even at this late hour was not quite quiet with various grandchildren staying over. He laughed, the sound warm and rich. Inconvenient and perfect. Would you change anything if you could go back? Not a single thing. Every moment, good and bad, led us here, led us to this. He squeezed her hand. Helena leaned her head on his shoulder, perfectly content. She had been sold during the harshest winter, stood on an auction block certain she would not survive. A cowboy had bought her freedom, given her a home, and won her heart so completely that she could not imagine existing without him. They had built a life together, raised 6 children, weathered storms both literal and figurative, and created a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The ranch would continue, probably through James and his children. The land they had fought for would remain in the family. But more than land or cattle or buildings, they had created a love story worth telling. They had proved that sometimes, in the darkest moments, hope could be found. That kindness could change lives. That love could grow from the most unlikely beginnings into something powerful and lasting. As Helena sat there with her husband on a warm summer night, surrounded by the physical proof of their shared life, she felt utterly at peace. She had started with nothing, lost everything, been sold like property. From those ashes, she and Kade had built an empire of the heart. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, vast and quiet and beautiful. Their children and grandchildren slept safe in the house they had built. Cattle grazed in fields they had cleared and fenced. Water ran through creeks they had fought to control. Every inch of it represented years of hard work and sacrifice and unwavering commitment. But what Helena valued most was the man beside her, the cowboy who had seen her worth when she stood at her lowest point. He had given her freedom, yes, but also purpose and partnership, and a love that had sustained her through 3 decades of life's joys and sorrows. "I love you," she whispered into the night. "I love you too," he replied, his voice carrying the weight of 30 years of shared history and the promise of whatever time they had left. They sat together under the stars, 2 people who had found each other in the harshest winter and created their own warmth. The story that had begun with fear and desperation had become one of hope and love and family. It was a story worth living, worth remembering, worth celebrating. And as Helena drifted off to sleep later that night in the bed she had shared with Kade for 3 decades, she did so with a smile on her face and gratitude in her heart. She had been sold during the harshest winter, but a cowboy had bought her freedom. And in the process of building a life together, he had won something far more precious than land or cattle or wealth. He had won her heart, completely and forever, and she had won his in return. That was the greatest treasure of all, the legacy that would outlast buildings and herds and even memory. They had loved each other deeply and well, had built something beautiful from nothing, and had proved that even in the harshest circumstances, love could not only survive but flourish. Their story was complete, a circle closed, a journey fulfilled. From the auction block to the ranch house, from desperation to prosperity, from strangers to soulmates. It was a story of the Wild West, of survival and determination, but most of all it was a love story. And like all the best love stories, it had a happy ending that would echo through generations yet to come.